Okay, cool. I think we can kick it off. Um, Hi, everybody. This is Robo Radio 13, and I'm excited to introduce Jason Snell, musical neurofeedback artist. Jason, it's honor to have you on Robo Radio, where we saw your work, really interested, and happy to listen to your career path and your projects. I'm going to give the mic to you.
Great, thank you. Uh, Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and it's a really great group of people. So, my experience started quite a long time ago in that I had these three parallel paths in my life that merged in 2018. And so when I was 13, I started programming computers. It was MS-DOS, and I made a little choose your own adventure like text. And it was before GUI, so it was like 1989. It was a really long time ago. Then in my late teens, 1995, I got my first drum machine and discovered that I was a musician. And I was never really into music in school, but once I got a drum machine, I realized, oh, I am musical. Like my passion is rhythms and electronic music and loops. And for me, that was really the beginning of using machines as a part of my creativity. Prior to that, I illustrated and painted, but to use this machine, and there was a certain autonomy that the machine had because with the drum machine, as you're programming these loops, you add a sound, and then it's in the loop, and it continues to play on its own ostensibly forever. But there's this, it's like a relationship between this thing that's looping and kind of adding and subtracting to it as you're developing a techno song or some other type of dance beat. And I loved it. I drove that first drum machine totally into the ground, just filling it up with as many patterns as possible. There was no way to save it. There wasn't like a computer to connect it to or to save the data. So I'd record it onto cassette because that was what we had in 95. And then I would just have to delete everything and start from scratch. But I still have those cassettes. So I can send those over later if you're interested. Some of it's all right. And then in 1996, part of it was a New Year's resolution, and part of it was starting to meet people in the area I grew up. So I grew up in eastern Iowa in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And in Fairfield, Iowa, which is this little small town in southeastern Iowa, there's this international meditation university, Maharishi, so Maharishi International University. And I was meeting all of these teens who were my age at techno and rave parties in the mid 90s, and they were growing up in a meditation community. So their parents had moved them from the coast, from California, New York, to the middle of Iowa, which they weren't necessarily happy about. And they were discovering raves as a way to kind of rebel and get away from, or just, have fun, get away from this culture that they were sometimes growing up in. And I started to pick up ideas of what meditation was. And in a way, meditation is a technology in itself. I think Maharishi does talk about the mantras that they teach as a technology that helps you get to a deeper state, into a meditative state. And I never learned that technique specifically, but 1996, I was coming off of a, you know, pretty intense, probably drug binge over New Year's. And I thought maybe I'll try a short stint of sobriety and let's try meditating. And I began meditating and just, it was intensely sensational, probably because I was detoxing. But it really made an impression on me if I just sit still, how different that is than just waking up and being active all day. Um, and so that began a lifelong meditation practice. And I've learned all sorts of different types of techniques. And all of them are great. I don't subscribe to a particular one. So fast forward a few decades, I continue to make music. I make all sorts of experimental type of music, uh, hardcore, breakcore, various genres that probably will make no sense to most of your listeners. drum and bass, techno, industrial. And I did film scores for a period of time. And my favorite thing to score was horror films because the music is so integral into telling the audience what to feel. And so, in many ways, doing film scores and horror film scores was a predecessor to how do I make sound to help people feel a certain way, to entrain them just through soundscapes, even without a neurofeedback loop, without any sensors. And really, all music entrains people. You listen to something because you want to feel sad and you cry, or you want to get excited and pumped up to go out to the club or whatever. So all music does this entrainment, which is a core part of my practice. So film scores, and I started experimenting with different types of technologies because I had used pre-existing, I was using synthesizers, I was using software, I was using things that other people made. And after experimenting with genre and composition for many years, I wanted to start making my own tools. And so in 2009, I built, it was iOS 2, and they opened up the SDK for independent developers to make their own iPhone apps. And I made a generative music app to just constantly create new compositions that evolved over a few years. In 2014, I rebranded it. It's called Refractions, and it's this ambient soundscape generator. And over time, I developed an AI with it, and I kind of stumbled backwards into it because what I was doing was I was tracking what notes of what instruments that an individual user would make music from, including myself. So there were certain synths I liked the low sounds, there were other synths I liked the high sounds, and that would record it locally, in the iPhone app. And then when it would choose to regenerate new compositions, it wasn't random, it was based on that person's experience. So the more I used the app, the more it made music that sounded like me. And that was something that was intriguing at the time. It was 2014. AI wasn't a huge thing yet. And I ended up performing with it a number of times. So it was almost like having a robot bandmate. And I could be really excited and proud of it as it generated some sort of sequence that was interesting because it wasn't me. Like I created the system, but it was a Frankenstein. Like it was making its own thing. And it would send me the notes. It would send me the musical notes, the MIDI, the sheet music. And then I would turn the knobs on the synthesizer. So it was this collaboration where I shaped the music and this little app was making the music. I ended up recording a number of those sessions, and it made this, I chopped them into songs, and it became this album called How to Play Dead. And it was this beautifully nostalgic music. And it was more beautiful and organic and nostalgic than something I could make. And it ended up getting on this German record label that I had been trying to get on for 15 years. And I was humbled. I was like, I made something that makes music better than me. And I was humbled, I was butthurt, and I decided to stop working with AI. I was like, I'm going to put myself out of work if I keep doing this. And then left that and ended up taking a new direction. I will share a little bit of that, like one of the things that it created. So let me share my screen, and I'll make sure that I share audio as well. So let's share sound. Let's optimize stereo, and we can do Safari. All right, let's watch the music video. Should load my YouTube. turn the volume down a little bit. And can you hear me and the music? Is that a fair balance?
Yep.
Um, so I'm using these old VHS clips that are being triggered when the note comes in from the AI sequencer. And again, I chose the textures and the synths, but the composition is something that's being generated in real time. Um, and for me, an advantage of this system was in traditional music making, particularly electronic music. I'm alone in a studio and I have these moments where I'm like, oh, this is such a cool sound, but I'm alone. And I record it. Maybe it gets pressed on vinyl. Maybe it's released digitally. 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, I'm presenting it at a rave or some sort of music show. And that's when everyone else hears it for the first time. So there's this huge lag between when I create something, that moment of creation where I feel most inspired, and then when I present it and other people hear it for the first time. Using the system collapsed that window of time to where this little AI bandmate was making music that I'm hearing for the first time as the audience. And I get to look over at the app and be like, whoa, that's really cool, little robot bandmate. And so that was a really appealing thing about the system. I'm gonna pause this. And so the next step I took in terms of starting to merge this programming, this computer programming thread that I have, and then this music thread, because this started to merge those two paths, so 1989 started computer programming, 1995 started making music. So some of the paths are converging. And then the next thing was working with these dancers. And I wanted to work with people again. I didn't want to work with AI anymore. And I met a dancer in Berlin and at a wedding in Berkeley. And she had said that she had worn motion sensors in her performances where her motion controlled the lights, but what she really wanted was to be able to control the music, so she could become the composer. And I was just finishing up this work on this, generative dynamically assembling music system. And I thought, I could do that. Of course I could do that. And she got excited about the idea. We started working together, and then I ended up working with several dancers. And the one we'll see here is a dancer in Los Angeles named Ty Wells. And they put on these sensors, and their movement triggers sounds on software or drum machine. And one of the things that is really powerful with this is I started, I was mostly a tech on this. Like I would set it up. I wasn't part of the performance, but I would set up the tech and then the dancer would perform and they were the center of the attention. I saw how fast they were learning. So what we'll see in the video next is maybe his second time performing with this system. So the first time really was just swinging his arms around and mapping like, is this sound cool for this movement? And is this sound cool? And what happens if I crossfade this? So the first was a tech rehearsal. And this was the second performance. It will feel like it's more rehearsed because his movement is triggering the sound. So everything's synchronized. But the speed, I could see the dancers' brains, just the neuroplasticity happening as they were moving. And the most recent time I've done this was last year with an artist in Iowa, a dancer. And during the performance, which was only his third time using it, so it's usually the rehearsal is the second time using it, the third time is the actual performance. While he was using it, he started to see the sound. He started to experience synesthesia for his very first time. My theory behind that is because the learning loop, to be able to move and control the sound so quickly, my theory is that increases neuroplasticity, which has all sorts of benefits, potential for medical or learning or, trauma therapy, all sorts of possibilities there. But because the learning loop is so fun and so engaging and so fast, the neuroplasticity is increasing and all these new neurons are firing and wiring together, when using a neurofeedback or a feedback loop like this. And so I think what happened with his dancer last year is he started to experience synesthesia because his senses started to fuse together as well. He had never experienced it before, so this was a new experience to him. So even this system, I think there's an incredible amount of capability in it. Let's take a look at maybe 30 seconds of this performance with Ty. Let's look at this one. Turn it down again. Can you hear me? Um, so Ty and I used this. Uh, what we did is we teamed up beforehand and chose these different sounds that would be really interesting to them. Because if the sound kit is interesting to the dancer, they're naturally going to have movements to manipulate and trigger those sounds in a way that's rewarding to them. So I don't use a sound kit. I develop a sound kit with the dancer, something that's exciting to them. And with this particular one, he wanted to start with these organic sounds. So earlier in the set, he took a field recorder and it's him like hitting his chest and making these guttural sounds with his voice, these very human flesh sounds. And then slowly I'm crossfading one sound kit into another. So you hear a mix between the two, and then you fully end up on this sound kit that is twisted metal machine sound. So what we were experimenting with was this idea of him losing his humanity by technology. And so informed by those types of sounds, you can see he's moving in this way like he's this malfunctioning robot. Whereas earlier in it, he's more moving expressive like we can see. But this is essentially showing his demise with mechanical sounds. This is one of my favorite performances that I've done with the dancer in terms of the sound kit, the way he moved with it, how he was able to learn and manipulate different following that, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. So following that, get up to late 2017, and this is where all those three paths. So there's this other path I've been doing this whole time, but it hasn't been incorporated in my work, and that's meditation. And in late 2017, I had this particularly vivid dream, lucid dream, vivid dream, that of making music from biology. So the dream was actually about making music using my own DNA sequences. And that was something I was able to eventually do a couple of years later when I went back for my master's at NYU. So I was able to download my DNA from, I think it was Ancestry, and create a chromosome protein, DNA music player. So you run the DNA through it and it fires off these notes as it identifies particular proteins and fires off different pitches of this pretty synth sound. But the idea from the dream was, okay, how do I make music not from external, like motion, which is more of this gross motor skill, this more expressive thing, but how do I make music from something's on the inside? So I started to work on these different techno tracks at the time, and this is, 2018. And at some point in 2018, it's just an Instagram ad, but I saw an ad for a Muse EEG headset. And so there are these headsets, got a ton of them lying around. I'm gonna grab one. So there are these Bluetooth EEGs. They're a headband. They go onto your forehead. And these are commercially available and they're sold by Interaxon. There's different models now. There's more of a kind of a fuzzy athletic headband version. But the first one I started with was one of these. And it's got brainwave sensors on the front and on the back of the ears. It's got electrodes. And then the later models also have a little red laser that shines onto your forehead. So it picks up your heart rate. So you can grab your heart as the live tempo to the music. So I saw an ad for one of these and I realized this is a Bluetooth device just like the motion sensors that the dancers were using. So I thought if I get one of these headsets and connect it to Bluetooth to a similar iPhone app as I built for the motion sensors, could I potentially, instead of triggering a sound by moving my arm, could I trigger a sound by doing something in my brain? And this was a really intriguing thought. As a kid, I read X-Men, and so there's people with telekinesis or telepathy. They could do stuff in their head and they could move stuff, or they could do stuff in their head and so I bought one of them. I bought a Muse headset. I got it, and within 36 hours, I had a prototype ready. So I was pulling data from the Muse, and I was running it to an iPhone. The iPhone was running a cable into one of my synthesizers. And the way I coded it was if I'm able to, I think it was clear my mind, will that fire off a note on the synthesizer in front of me? So I got everything hooked up. I put the thing on. I remember kind of looking at the synthesizer and I cleared my mind and this little red LED went beep. And that was my eureka moment of I just told the synthesizer to do something by changing my mental state. And so if I can trigger a note by clearing my mind, are there other ways I can trigger notes? Can I go into a focus state? What happens when I meditate? What if I start to dream? If I can capture that data from an EEG and then feed it into a musical composition, you know, my first iteration of that is, could I do a techno set just with my brain without touching anything? So that was my first goal in 2018, leading into 2019. I wanted to be able to do essentially DJ with my mind. I wanted to be able to DJ a full 1 hour techno set just by like sitting and meditating. Don't touch the gear. Don't adjust anything. Just do things in my head and do that. So early 2019, I did my premiere. It was in Iowa. Iowa has been tremendously supportive with art grants for this whole project. And the first time I did it was in Des Moines, Iowa. It was in this very little art gallery. And I, had this ended up being like a 12-minute techno set. It started quite small. But I was used to, I come from a background of making really noisy, abrasive, experimental music that not a lot of people like. And so, here I am doing another weird thing, like Jason and his weird music. And this first show, capacity of the room was probably safely like 25 people. It was a small stage, small space. And I thought, this is perfect. This is fine. At least it'll look full. 120 people showed up. They were like spilling out into like the adjacent shop and out onto the street. And I was like, oh, this is different. This is different than my other projects. And the second show was at a festival the next month in Iowa City. And I was a little more used to the system, but I was sitting on a stage, huge sound system. So the bass waves are hitting me as well. So it's not just me hearing the music, but I'm feeling the music. I'm feeling the kick drum. And so as I meditated, so, my consciousness drops down, the music itself got deeper. And then I was able to go even deeper in my meditation. And then the music got like dreamier and subbier and dubbier. And so I laddered down with the music, down, 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 until I began to dream. So I'm sitting on stage, meditating, and I'm dreaming. I'm still awake because I hear the music coming in, but I've entered what later I've learned is a full trance state. So if you look at ancestral practices like Mayan cultures and various indigenous cultures, they'll come around a campfire, it's dark, and they'll have drumming, and that's a way through a repetitive beat to bring people down into these trance states. And once you're down in this trance state, you have access to different parts of your mind, different parts of your consciousness. So it could be dreams, it could be creative idea, it could be emotional resolution. Some cultures, as they do these practices, they feel that they can time travel and speak with their ancestors, but also their future descendants, people in their future. And so it's a really interesting space. It's a hypnotic space. Um, so I got there during this techno set, and I got there fast because the whole set was only about 12, 15 minutes long. And I reached this trance state, I'd say within 10 minutes, if not quicker. And I remember opening my eyes and I thought I'd forgotten where I was. I didn't have a sense of how long I was in this trance state. And I forgot that I was at a show. So I remember opening my eyes and seeing the crowd. And I thought, oh shit, I'm at a show. Like I'm not at home. I completely forgot where I was. In 25 years of performing prior to that, I'd never been that relaxed on stage. And so something was happening there that was really special and just a really unique experience. I'll show you just a brief snippet of that show. And I think that could be interesting. So let me cue this up. Go to channel and let's videos, neurofeedback. And the second show is, let's see, feed me. I ended up taking the footage from two cameras. So there's not two of me. It just ends up kind of looking trippier. So do not be alarmed if you see two of me. All right, let's share sound. And we'll go to, and the festival was called Feed Me Weird Things. And I'll fade. All right, so I'm gonna fade that down a little bit. So the sound gets brighter and then it dives down and then it gets brighter and then dives down. Those dives are when my alpha waves are increasing. So as I move deeper into a meditation, the music gets deeper and shaves off the highs and it gets like lower and deeper. And having that loop, and again with these big speakers, I was feeling the drums, hitting my body. Those were key elements. Later in the research, those are key elements for me to get better. And then coming out of that, I never show this video, but lucky you, lucky Robo. It's a pretty embarrassing video, but it's an important part of my practice. So I'm going to go to even further. I never show this. I refer to it, but I never show it. I mean, it's on my website, but so later that same year, so this is 2019 on tour, I had this show at Even Further Festival. And the festival itself, it's named after Ken Kesey. It's a very psychedelic type of festival. Even Further written on the front of the bus. And there was just an electricity in the air. It was a very kind of charged day. And myself, I was sober. I've been sober since 1998. But on stage, I ended up having a full-blown psychedelic mystical experience. So instead of winding down into a meditative state, what happened with this was I'm standing, as you'll see in the footage. I'm standing, and the music gets more excited as I get more excited, and then I get more excited as the music gets more excited, and I spiral up instead of spiraling down. And so I started to have these really intense experiences of awe, of gratitude, of wonder, and then full blown ecstasy. And I started to weep. I felt this presence of the universe, like this massive love, just like cracking open through reality and shining on me. And that's the type of language you typically use when someone has had a psychedelic or a full-blown spiritual mystical experience, like a religious experience that, and these moments can be really powerful. I mean, it can lead people to change their entire life paths, having these types of experiences. I didn't expect this to happen. And my goal was, like I'd mentioned, was can I do a 1 hour techno set because it's cool, because it's novel, because it's interesting. I wasn't expecting these doors to open inside of my consciousness. So it's a short video, or I'll skip through it, but you get to see me ugly cry because that's what we're really here for. So you hear that where the beat drops out and there's this flush of sound. Those are emotions coming off. So you can see it in my face all the time as I'm oscillating, having music flushes out. And then as I get grounded a little bit, it comes back, it just hits me. So, all right, enough of that. Lucky you. Um, so after those experiences, I realized there was a lot more to this than just a cool techno party trick. And that led me to post-pandemic. Like during the pandemic, I really dove into the signal path. So I learned this is super nerdy stuff, but fast Fourier transform. It's the same thing we run music through to see a EQ equalizer, like on your screen or on a stereo. So I learned how to do fast Fourier transform on my own brainwaves rather than using the SDK of the manufacturer. So I hacked into the headset as a generic Bluetooth device and create my own signal path. While doing that, I was able to create much more nuanced methods for when do notes get triggered, how do you manipulate sound, how do you shape the sound, and that led to I filed a patent in 2022. And coming out of the pandemic, I returned to school. So after 25 years of being out of school, I went to grad school and I went to NYU there. The parent program is ITP, Interactive Telecommunications Program. From the word telecommunications, you could probably tell that was named in the 80s. They have a newer version of it called Interactive Media Arts. And I wasn't, I didn't want to do a 2 year degree. My art career, I was really satisfied with, but I knew that doing a master's potentially could open more doors, which it has. And particularly with a school like NYU. So I ended up going to, they have a 1 year program and it's super intense. There's no breaks. So it's like 12 months nonstop, like your friends and family think you're kidnapped. Um, so I went to that and it was this really beautiful program. It's called Low Res, which is the worst name ever because there's nothing low res about it. It's like high intensity, high res, like a little low res sweatshirt. This is actually from a record label also named Low Res, just weird synchronicities in my life. So I went to this program. It was New York City, Berlin, and then the thesis work was in Shanghai. So it was a really beautiful process to study the phenomenon of what I experienced in my art. How do I see, is this repeatable? Like, can other people experience this? Was it just me? Was it just that even further festival? Was it just that trance on that one stage? And so I started looking at what were the elements of those shows, which I had these transcendent experiences. Key thing was repetitive beat. So each of them had this, repeating beat, which is really common in trance rituals. And each of them had big sound systems. So there's something about haptics. The more ways that I can input a signal into my body, that increases the immersion of the experience. And then that lights up my brain even more, which then outputs the signal and you create this feedback loop. So I worked with neuroscientists at NYU and UCLA. I did lots of studies on my poor classmates, and I did one on myself, which is, I'll show you a minute of it. It's quite interesting. Um, what I did was I experimented with what happens to my brain. So I had an EEG and I was learning about what the different brain waves mean. So I was using the EEG not to produce music, but just actually like a normal researcher, I'm going to put an EEG to track my brainwave states. What I did is I played a repetitive beat for a full hour. So I sat there. I've got a speaker right in front of me, so the bass is hitting me pretty directly. I've got a light that's pulsing with the beat, and it's also, I think that is connected to my live heartbeat. And I'm just sitting in my room meditating for a full hour. And I wanted to see what's the impact. Like, can I get to this type of trance state that is often talked about, as people get into these deeper rituals? Let me see if I can find this repetitive, which I'm not spelling correctly. Repetitive? No. Trance. There we go. So what happens? Yeah, I'll just run it with the audio. It's a really good summary. So share screen, we've got sound. I'll turn it up a little bit. If it's too noisy, just flag me down. What happens to our brain waves when we become entranced with music? I've been researching the impact of repetitive beats, which are a similar tempo and pitch as our heartbeats. This beat is universal to humans, as we all spend several months hearing our mother's heartbeat. I performed an hour-long experiment where I heard my live heartbeat with a wash of white noise, emulating the womb. When our brain is in a beta state, a repeating beat is quickly understood and then becomes boring. Past that, our mind moves down into an alpha state where even small changes in the sound become fascinating. Finally, the mind loses track of the music and moves into a theta state, seeing and experiencing dreamlike visions and entering a trance. All right. Well, because it was art school, I had to take my shirt off and like make interesting lighting. So that's what you get, mom and dad, for sending me to art school. But what I learned from the experience was, when these performances or these repetitive beats begin, I'm in essentially what's a beta state. So I'm wanting novelty. I want something new, and I'm restless and I'm problem solving. It's what we're in when we're at work, and then. After about 10 minutes, I got into this more meditative state where even though I had been hearing the exact same thing for 10 minutes, I started to actually notice it and really the nuance and the detail of it and the beauty of like the bass rippling and each kick hitting. And then around 20, 25 minutes, the sensation of hearing moved from the front of my brain to the back of my brain. And in the front of my brain, I started to dream. and I was awake. So very similar to that second show. And I realized this is the trance state. This is the state that is induced through ancestral practices. And so I did that. I put some of my classmates through that. My thesis ended up being the sound design that can help people achieve that state. I developed a format of doing these biofeedback sound baths. So I put on the sensor and people hear music and feel the bass from my heartbeat and my brain waves. And it becomes this very encompassing, immersive environment. I'll show you a little bit of that footage. I think it's quite interesting. The early ones were all in New York. Let's do sound math. And there was this one that I did. It was in this loft in Chelsea. And to this day, it's one of the most effective ones. And I think it was because it was in such a cozy place. So if I do it in a yoga studio with like hard floors and mats and maybe they have a blanket, but it's not as cozy as a home. But there's something about getting deeply comfortable that allows people to go deeper into the subconscious. And really trippy things started to happen where people started to confuse my heartbeat with their heartbeat, or they found that their own heartbeat was syncing up with mine, or they would forget that they are them and they started to think they were me. So they had this ego dissolution, this loss of self. They forget where in the room they were. They forget that they were at some sort of weird, like culty sound bath in a loft in Chelsea. And also a real common thing was loss of time. So they forgot, is this 15 minutes? Is this 30? Is it 50? So people, their sense of time became quite distorted. I'll share just a little clip of this so you can get a sense of what the sound baths look like. Biofeedback sound bath, share sound. Skip ahead a little bit. So the lights are pulsing to my live heartbeat, and the color of the light is based on my mental state. So if I'm more stimulated, it's red. And if I'm deep in a meditation, it's blue. It's usually somewhere in the middle as a purple. Sorry, I fell a little bit into a trance just watching it, which is the point. So it's very similar to the experiment I did to myself. I'm then subjecting large groups of people to it. And then after that, people started coming up to me after these performances, telling me these wild visions that they had. But of course, they also said, can I try it? Like, can I put it on? Or can like all of us wear this? And so that led to this next iteration, which I call brainwave symphonies. So in those, I'm not necessarily wearing the sensor, I'm putting it on other people. And their brains, as they move into a relaxed or meditative state, will fire off notes into a group composition. And then their joint heartbeats. So I average all their heartbeats, and that heartbeat sound comes out of a central subwoofer. So they can hear and feel each other's heartbeats coming through these bass waves in the room, emulating. Let me pull up one of those. Let's do symphony. I'll show you the performance rather than the talking head. Okay, turn them down here. Pulses. The first iteration of it was called Pulses, a brainwave symphony. So in this one, there's 8 people. iPhone, and the iPhone is still sending just the important data, the airdrop to my computer, the airdrop stream, and then all the information is coming to my computer, which output just and the blue lights as they're going on off indicates who's moving to. All right, pause that. The original iteration of that was in Iowa, and then the I did the second one. It was part of Sound Scene, which is a festival that happens at the Smithsonian Hirshhorn in DC. And there I did this rolling workshops where people would come in. There would be 6 people, and they would sit together for about 10, 15 minutes, and then there'd be another group of people watching them. And so when they would leave, more people would come in. So I ended up doing, I think it was around 100 people were able to experience this brainwave symphony, kind of cycling in and out. And it was middle of the summer. It was June, and it was noisy. It's a big institution with a lot of people, tourists walking by, not conducive to a meditative state. It's really a very stimulating environment. Even in that environment, people lost sense of where they were. They had deep emotional experiences. So some of them described of having these experiences of transcendence or weeping. One attendee, she started crying because not because of what she experienced, but the fact that she was able to hear her friend's heartbeat and brain for the first time. Because this is someone she had known a long time and she loved dearly, but she never heard her biometrics. So I started to see that using this technology was a way to feel more connected to the people around you. And that's always been my experience with this tech, and my goal is that usually my experience with technology is I'm looking at my phone, I've disconnected from the people around me, and I'm scrolling at stuff that makes me feel bad about myself. Or I'm working, I'm on my computer, I'm being a workaholic, and I'm, not connected to the people around me. So to use technology in a way that increases vulnerability, that increases connection, whether that's to myself and having these like deep transcendent experiences, or going deep into my own subconscious, or as a practice of vulnerability. So I put on the headset, and then 60 people, 60 of my closest friends in cuddle puddles in a big living room around me get to hear what's going on inside of me. So that is an act of vulnerability, because I can't hide my heartbeat. I can't really fake my brain waves into a more guarded or defensible position. Like what's happening inside of me is coming out the speakers and it's being rendered in the lights. So it's a very vulnerable position. And then finally, with this group connection, where people get to feel connected to either people they've known or people they've just met in these brainwave synchrony sessions. And I think I'll start to wrap up. It's an hour long. Is that correct?
Yes, and we wanted to have like maybe 10 minutes for Q&A. I'm sure people have a lot of questions.
Absolutely. Let's move into that sooner and later. I'll just wrap up by saying, um, next steps that happened with this was I did a research study with NYU, with a collaborator from UCLA, and then the Roddenberry Foundation. And we tested a very simple version of my musical neurofeedback system. We had 50 participants. The control was they listened to a pre-recorded, essentially like a ambient song you'd hear. I composed it, but it's something that you'd hear like getting a massage or being at a spa. And then I took those exact same sounds for the experimental condition, where those sounds are being triggered and shaped in real time based on the person's mental state. Um, so we did those experiments, we collected the data, and two things really surprised me. And there were kind of add-ons just at the end. And it was from Kaya, my collaborator in UCLA. She wanted to track the heart rate, so we used the heart math ear clip. And so we got heart rate and also heart rate variability, which people who maybe have an aura ring or are into that type of thing, it's a way to track your overall relaxation or the openness of your system, of your nervous system. So we grabbed heart rate, HRV, and then almost we didn't intend to use the full quiz, but we had a survey afterwards called the MEQ, which is Mystical Experiences Questionnaire. Typically, this is administered after a psychedelic session. So it's talking about ego dissolution, loss of time, loss of space, positive affect. Do you feel at one with all the objects around you? Do you feel a sense of a higher being? Like really these, I mean, kind of what I experienced at that festival, that I would have scored very high on the MEQ coming off of that trip, that biofeedback trip. For a 12-minute session, I didn't expect a lot, from the subjects at NYU. And really, the reason we use the MEQ is it was almost the rest of the questions were camouflage. I wanted to see if people had loss of time and loss of space because that was such a consistent thing that was being reported from the sound baths. Um, to our surprise, people were scoring complete mystical experiences coming out of this room after a 12-minute session. I was like, I don't know what's happening there. Like, even though I've experienced it myself, I always have this feeling of doubt of like, it's not going to work this time. But over and over and over, like this thing that happened to me on stage, a number of times in 2019, other people are experiencing this. And so, I've teamed up with a business partner last year, a fellow alum from NYU in the same program. We have a company called Siberian, so it's Cyberian. It's named after a Timothy Leary phrase talking about the real journey is an internal journey, not an external journey. And we're commercializing this technology because right now, in the past, people have to find me or find one of my shows and get in line in order to experience it. So we were like, how do we get this to as many people as possible in a scalable way? And so that's what we're focusing on. We have some pilots coming up in late September. So I'll be going to the US and starting with a few different wellness centers and then see what people's experiences are. Are they similar to what I experience and the people who are at my art shows? And is this something that can help people feel more connected to themselves and connected to the people around them in a very organic way? Because all of these are biological sensors. So I'll wrap it up there. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that have come up. I know it's some really like wild shit and it's like really sci-fi, but it's been just fantastically fun to work on this. And like I mentioned, 1989, 1995, 1996, this is really my life's work. So I could talk about it for, just hours on end. So I'll shut up.
Thank you so much, Jason. This was a complete mystical experience, 100%. And I'm sure, I mean, people in this room, the listeners, they all went to their own personal places while looking at your work and listening to you. I really am feeling grateful to you for this.
Thank
And
you.
maybe I'll start not with a question, but like with a compliment. The topic of bravery is really important for me personally on my journey, and I want to encourage people who are in this room right now or will be viewing this recording. It's so fucking hard to be brave and put yourself in, as you say, in this vulnerable state and let others witness what's happening to you because essentially you were in an exposed state. And I think for a lot of designers or creatives, that's a really hard thing to do. Yeah, thank you. Even as a viewer, when I was watching those videos, I almost was uncomfortable in a way, like, oh, but you were like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. So kudos to you, man. Really, I respect.
Thank you. Thank you. I try to have a sense of humor about it too. And you are lucky. I do not show the ugly cry video. Like when I teach, I taught at NYU for a year. I would tell my students about it and I give them extra credit if they could find the video, but I wouldn't show it in class.
That was fun. I'll let people ask questions. Yeah, yeah, let's spend some time for Q&A.
Yeah,
Who
maybe
wants
I'll
to go?
start. Yeah, like first of all, it was something. I felt so much in 1 hour. I'm usually not that, sensitive, but I don't know, maybe it's some extra something. I don't know. And I have maybe a weird question, but have you ever thought about using this like people personal experiences in your work intentionally to maybe, make it more engaging or more, I don't know, like something.
Can you rephrase that? From what I heard was to use, did you say the peak experience part of it? I just want to make sure I understood the question.
I mean, you collecting people experiences while interacting, like while that they interact with your work, and do you only collect it, or you ever try to use it again in your works to make it more,
Oh.
let's say, engaging or something?
I think I understand what you're getting at, in that in the performances, it's ephemeral, so it's the live data, which is creating the music. Do I record it or record that to use in other work later? Is that the
Uh,
question?
Kind of. Maybe you notice that people react this way on your this part of work, and you're like, oh, I can use it again and maybe make it, I don't know, music louder or, you know,
To iterate on it.
yeah.
There is an iteration cycle, definitely. And that's one of the things that I love about art, as opposed to how slow science can be, like formal studies. So, like with the Roddenberry study, the NYU study, it took maybe a year to get to the point where I actually put a headset on someone. There was so much paperwork and bureaucracy and IRB, which is great. And then it ends up having more impact later. But with an art show, I can have my system ready a week later, have a show and get a sensor on someone and start to get some results very quickly. And so each time I did a show, at some point, either during the show or after the show, I would have this intuitive flash of what the next iteration should be. And so I continue to iterate. Um, in the large majority of shows, I don't record the biometrics unless I have explicit permission, because that's a whole thing with
Hmm.
privacy. I mean, these are very vulnerable data streams. Um, I do document all of them. So I've got videos and audio recordings. And certainly when something is effective, it helps inform how to shape the soundscapes for the next one. But I'm such a neophile that I always want to reinvent things from scratch rather than like, oh, this worked great last time. Let's start from scratch now. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? But it leads to a lot of innovation because I keep experimenting from scratch, and I think that can be a good thing. Um, and it is interesting as we're moving into commercialization. One of the focuses that I am doing right now is looking back, which of these sound kits were really impactful for people and really engaging to people, and what version of those sound kits, because I would always tweak them. And then the performances, each one was different because the biometrics would be different. So none of the compositions are identical. Even with the Brainwave Symphonies, it was the same sound kit, but every single session was different because it's essentially same instruments but different players. Um, but I think the other thing, which I think ties into Robo and the idea of design, is experience design and neuroaesthetics. So, what kind of room is it in? What are the acoustics? What's the lighting? How comfortable are the seats? All those things make it either more immersive or more distracting. So that type of design, that's something that as we're starting to partner with these different wellness clinics, that's an important part, is that we work with them to create a space that's as immersive as possible, instead of just saying, hey, here's an iPad and a headset, have fun, but working with them to make something that's a deeper experience. Ideally, connecting it to visuals or the lights, really tailoring the experience so it's deeper. And that I only learned by doing these sound baths over and over and over and over. Like I said, yoga floor, hardwood, bad lighting, maybe a poor sound system, it's not going to work as well. But huge sound system and being really cozy, it works great.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you so much
Great
for your
question.
speech today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think they want to hear you. Yeah. Hi, Jason. First of all, shout out to low res. I'm halfway through ITP, so it's really cool.
Hey, awesome.
It was an amazing lecture. I really enjoyed it. It looks like an amazing journey, and it's also exposing and being brave and everything that was said. I'm very interested to understand what is your core mission in commercializing your product or experience, and what are you trying to make people understand or experience. So you said that you're going into wellness centers, so that sounds like an amazing opportunity for people that go to wellness centers, but are you hoping for it to be a new instrument? Are you hoping for it to be a new way of connecting people into their emotions, or just going into trance stages more frequently or for the first time? And also another question is like, how does that work mechanically? I'm not a musician, but you put on the headset and you have your waves and the EEG reads. What kind of music is operated by the, like, can I think hard enough or not think at all to create drums? Or can I think in another direction in order to create strings? Or it's all like more ambient? If you can just further explain about that.
Sure, great questions. Can you repeat the first question? I'll take them one at a time. First
Yeah,
question was mission.
commercialization of the product. What are you expect? What do you want it to be? What are you hoping? How will it reach people? What are you hoping for them to experience? Will that be like
Sure.
sitting in a room playing music, or sitting in a room crying over everything I didn't cry about beforehand? Both.
More the latter. So it's creating increased interoception, self-awareness, a connection with the self. Um, Many of the things that I was able to come across through meditation, but it can take years to get to some of the benefits of deeper meditation practice. And then also some of the experiences that, so I used drugs heavily from 94 to 98. Um, in a very unsafe environment, but I did have very profound experiences with hallucinogens during those years. So to be able to provide some of the insight, the creativity, the access to self, the profound shift in perspective, like those experiences shape the way that I live in this world and view reality and experience reality. So to be able to provide that similar type of um, door opening to folks without them having the risk of taking hallucinogens, which I had various consequences for at the time when I was younger. So very much a connection to the beauty of being a human being. That's the goal. We're using wellness centers first because that is an area where there's fewer gatekeepers. So, for example, other people have said, "Can I get this into my kid's school for the mental health of the school?" Getting a new technology into a school has a ton of different gatekeepers. Whereas a wellness center, if it's independently owned, we talk with the owner, we talk with the meditation teacher, and then we're in. The folks who come to these centers are usually people who are on a journey already. So they're either they had pain or they have some sort of they're burned out or they're stressed, and they're open to trying different modalities. And we feel that's a good beachhead for finding new customers. Eventually, we want to reach many more people than just wellness centers, and so commercializing into other spaces. But the goal, the experience of someone sitting down is going to be the same. How can I have a deeper experience of myself? Did they answer the first question? And then the second question, was it the tech question or was there one in between?
I love that question. How
The
does
tech
like
question.
what's yeah, what's the
Yeah.
instruments, so to say?
And how does it work? So the resolution of these headsets are going to be limited by the fact that it's outside of the skull. So, if it's an implant on the inside, you can get much higher resolution and fidelity of what the brain is doing and be able to making decisions. I'm not into drilling into people's heads, and so what I do is I'm using these external sensors, and what it provides is extremely valuable. So it doesn't give you I'm thinking of a guitar riff in C minor. Instead, what it gives you is what is the weather that's happening. So it's not an individual raindrop, but what weather is happening in the brain. There's this metaphor that I've run across before that's useful, which is if I'm outside of a stadium during a game, I can tell, is the crowd cheering? Are they booing? Are they quiet? Is the stadium empty? Is it full? So I have a sense of the general activity of the stadium. I can't hear an individual conversation. So having that lower resolution isn't a detriment because you're getting this macro data. So for example, if I'm a meteorologist, I don't care what a single raindrop is doing. I want to know what the whole weather system is doing in order to make a different level of decisions. And so that's the level I'm working at. So what I'm doing is getting the overall mental state of where a person's at. And I'm also using other biometrics. So with the Muse, there's motion sensors, so you can get a sense, is this person sitting still or are they kind of squirming around or moving? I can also pick up on muscle tension. Most people treat that as noise, but I treat it as a valid biometric. So the sensors are right here. So if my forehead is tense or if my jaw is tense, I'm going to pick up on that in a signal, and that's a valid stress signal. And then once someone gets more still, it can start to hear the quieter signal inside the skull, which is the brain. And you get a sense of, is the person focusing? Are they stressed out? Is their mind quiet? Are they meditating, which is a different state than a clear mind or a quiet mind? You know, it's like closing the eyes and really starting to surrender the active train of thought. And then I can also detect when someone moves into that trance state, which I studied at NYU. So that's a theta trance. So having that scale, that up and down scale, in a similar way that my techno tracks were changing based on where I'm at, I can create these soundscapes of using my own musicality, working with other musicians to create sound kits that the density, the textures, the crispness, the tempo, all these different musical factors using the same instrument change whether I'm locked into a focus state or if I'm starting to drift down into a quiet mind, a meditative space, or a dream state, and have the music follow me on that journey. But so it's mirroring where I'm at, but it becomes this relationship. And so I can make decisions just like I do in every conversation when people are talking back and forth. Do I want to rev this up? Do I want to take a step back? And it becomes this conversation back and forth. And that was one of the things with the study with the heart monitor is we found that heart rate variability increased when people had a responsive sound set, a neuroresponsive sound kit versus listening to an ambient song, which relaxed everyone, but didn't open up their system in that same conversational way. And so a real key part of this pipeline is, detecting the brain waves, detecting the mental state, using different oscillations in the brain to fire off the notes, and then the sound design. So taking great care with how is the sound constructed? What does the sound evoke? Can this sound be as universal as possible? So like with the repeating beat is quite universal for all humans because of the heartbeat. And how do I create a sound kit or other musicians create sound kits to reinforce that state, creating that feedback loop, which then amplifies the whole experience. Whenever you have a feedback loop, the results multiply. That was a bit long-winded. Did that answer the tech question well?
Thank you.
Okay. I can also talk about fast Fourier transform afterwards if you really want to dive deep.
Let's do one more question. I think we're a little over time, but yeah. Who wants
Yeah,
to?
I'd like to ask one more.
Yes, please.
So I'm wondering if you like what kind of feelings triggering the device itself. So not the music, but maybe the device. So for example, you already mentioned so when you are wearing it when you are meditating, maybe it's triggering the relaxation in your feeling. Maybe you think that it has its own personality. Maybe it's something like this. What do you think about it?
So the sensor itself, and different headsets pick up on different things. So I've used the Muse. I've also used headphone versions. So I did a thing with the Metropolitan Museum of Art that was a headphone version where the sensors were on the top and by the ears. So where the sensors are, you can pick up on different states. Sometimes people wonder, can you pick up on, am I sad versus tired or relaxed? Or am I scared versus excited? There's real similarity in those, and these devices, as far as I'm able to use them, can't tell the difference between those. So it's more about what is my activation level, so like I mentioned earlier, am I in kind of a locked in focus state, or am I starting to let go of those, and drop down into deeper and deeper layers? So it isn't really an emotional sensor, but what it's reading is electricity coming off of the brain, and the patterns and the intensity of that electricity and what frequency that electricity is hitting, um, and that's my work with neuroscientists, is learning, like, what do these signals mean? How do I learn more about these signals, to give these states? So the states that I'm detecting, with my algorithms are, stress, focus, quiet mind, meditation, and then dreaming.
Got
What it's
it.
not
So,
detecting is like
mhm.
happy, sad, um, you know, bored,
Yeah.
scared. Did that answer?
So such way for you, these devices are more about like the tools themselves, or maybe you also see that sometimes they collaborator or shape your behavior to fall in this focus state, for example.
Tools as the software or the hardware that I
Yeah,
use?
yeah, the hardware.
The hardware certainly, there's going to be affordances with any hardware because what it can pick up is my raw material to work with in order to make the music from. And so, for example, if I just had one sensor that I could place somewhere in the head, I or if I'm just using, let's say, a heartbeat from an Apple Watch, I can still generate music from a single signal, but the complexity of the control is going to be less with one sensor. The nice thing about these Muse sensors is, compared to some of the other EEGs, is other EEGs will just read brainwaves, whereas the Muse also has that heartbeat sensor and a accelerometer, and so you get motion as well. So I can combine all of those data points to create a more nuanced or personalized, soundscape, based on where they're at on that day. So certainly the hardware largely informs the inputs going into my system, which then, of course, impacts the musicality or the sophistication of the musicality exiting my system.
Yeah.
Great
Cool.
question. Thank you.
All right, guys. Jason, I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you again so much. Thanks for giving us a really unique channel of inspiration. I feel like as designers who work in a specific industry like robotics, we don't get enough of sources like this. Thank you so much again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And if you want to reach out afterwards, Jason J Snell is the handle on YouTube or Instagram. That's the best way to see my work. And I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions.
Will do. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Have a
so
good
much.
day.
Thank you.
Thank you.